Yeah, that works.
All right, everyone. Welcome. It's Monday night, session 4. It is about 6:08 p.m. Central Time. We've got a special guest speaker, Guillermo Aguilar, and he is the pre-work instructor and also evaluates all of the challenges on the application. So I'm going to let him talk about what he's got going on and how he can help you out. And if you've got any questions, he's going to go through his thing real quick, and then he's going to open it up to questions. So Guillermo, go for it.
Hey everyone, as Charles mentioned, my name is Guillermo. I am a pop-up Platoon alum. I graduated about 18 months ago, January of 2022, and now I help out with applications here at Platoon. So I just wanted to go over the four-step application process, just so everyone's aware of it. I think about half the applications we get are more or less complete, and then the other half are probably not as complete. So students have to, I have to kick them back, and they have to like either redo coding challenges or make their YouTube video public, or sometimes they don't include a video, or they're missing like D2 routines or something like that. All right, so I do wanted to go over the 4 steps so everyone is aware of them for when they choose to apply, either in the upcoming cohort or 2 cohorts from now or in the future to Code Platoon. So step 1 of the application process, if you've already looked at it, or even if you haven't, is really just a lot of basic information. It's like, service, branch, your name, your email, phone number, ETS date, are you part of SkillBridge, stuff like that, very personal info. The second part of the application is short answer questions like paragraph form, and a video. The video will have you answer a couple questions, and I remember one of them's like, tell me a time where you had to learn something difficult or something like that. So you'll answer those questions live on a video that you record of yourself. And then the last part of that video is going over one of the Coder Bite challenges that you submitted. So make sure to save your Coder Bite challenges, just in case something weird happens with the application. I have students kind of like clear the cache or like work on their coding challenges on different computers, like their wife's computer and then their personal computer. And then they end up missing like half the coding challenges. So it's a good thing as you're going through the Coder Bite challenges, which I'm going to get to in a second, to save them on a Replit or something like that, or, a Google Doc, whatever the case may be. Okay, so part 1 is just basic information, pretty straightforward. Part 2 is the short answer questions plus the YouTube video. Part 3, I already mentioned, but it's the 12 Coder Bite challenges. And a lot of applications do get kicked back because you don't meet the minimum requirement of points. I can't share what the minimum requirement of points is to get a step into Code Platoon, but there is a minimum, and that's what I'm looking for. So the third part is the Coder Bite challenges. And then finally, the fourth part that a lot of people forget is a live technical assessment with me or Francisco or one of the other instructors. And that's just 3 very short coding challenges within like a 50-minute time block on Zoom. And really that live technical assessment is just pretty much we're just vetting everyone, make sure you didn't cheat on your application and just copy paste a bunch of chat GPT. And you can kind of know how to code. We're not looking for pros. We have really amazing curriculum. We have really amazing instructors who are going to coach you up, but we're just looking for you to have a baseline understanding of programming fundamentals. And I'll go ahead and mention what 4 things we're looking for in the technical assessment, because I get a lot of questions about that. We're looking for the following 4 things. Basic loops, basic variable assignment and reassignment, manipulation of strings and arrays, and the ability to access key value pairs and options. That's it. Those are the 4 main ideas that we assess you on a live technical assessment. So keep that in mind. So that is a 4-step application process, and the upcoming deadline for Whiskey is November 19th, so coming up, and that runs January 29th. With the start date of January 29th of 2024. And then the other deadline is for Foxtrot with a deadline of November 5th, and that one starts January 8th of next year. The last thing that I'm going to go over before I open it up to questions is just some common mistakes that I see on the application in hopes that you will avoid them. The first mistake that I see is you don't meet the minimum requirement of points for the Coder Bite challenges, and those challenges do take a fair amount of time. I remember when I sat down and I did my application, I thought I was going to finish it in 1 day. That was not the case. I finished the short answer questions, the about me, the video, all in 1 day, but the Coder Bite challenges took me almost a week to complete. So when you're filling out the application, be very mindful of the deadline. The 2 upcoming deadlines are November 5th of this year for Foxtrot and November 19th for for whiskey that starts next year. So be mindful. Give yourself like, I would apply early, maybe a couple weeks early if you can, or 2 weeks early, or at the very least a week early, just to make sure that you submit everything on time. The second most common mistake that I see on the application is the YouTube video won't be set to public. It's okay if it's unlisted, and actually we prefer if it's unlisted, but make sure that it's set to public so I can view it. Because typically I have to send an email saying, hey, can you put your video on public so I can see it? The third common mistake that I see in the application is people will apply late, or you will apply at like 11:50 p.m. on the deadline with 10 minutes to go, and then you'll fall short on one of the criteria, and then I will auto reject you. Simply for two reasons. One, you fell short, and two, you didn't use your time wisely enough, right? To give yourself enough time just in case something went wrong with your application, you would get a courtesy email. So I send courtesy emails to everyone unless you submitted it the day of the application. If you submitted it the day of the deadline, I don't send a courtesy email, and you just have to hope that you have everything, right? Outside of the last day, even if it's like the second to last day and you submit you're missing something, I'll email you right away and say, hey, you're missing this. You need to submit it, you have, a day, or whatever the case may be. And then the fourth common mistake that I see, I already kind of alluded to it, underestimating how long the application is. It's going to give yourself very comfortably at least a week or two to complete it, because those quarter byte challenges do take a long time. And just the last couple of things that I have here, the last two things that I have is a common email that I get is that quarter byte is wrong. In the time that I've been here, like 18 months, quarter byte's never been wrong on a coding challenge. Typically people like misread the coding challenge and think quarter byte is wrong. It's never been wrong. And I actually used to send like really elaborate emails on when someone would question one of the answers and say, hey, you're thinking about it this way, but in reality, this is what it's supposed to be. But also, we get so many of those that I stopped doing that. I just email you, hey, it's not wrong, you're wrong, and then fix it. Simply because of time. Like I get so many of them, like I can't respond to those emails. I also will get a handful of emails requesting their coding challenges. Like once you submit your challenges, just know you're not getting any of those. There's a very simple reason why. At first, when I first took this job, I would send people's coding challenges back. The CoderByte is not, it doesn't have a system to send you back your coding challenges. I would have to like screenshot all your challenges and then send them to you. And I used to do that. But then again, I was getting so many of them, it's not practical for me to do it. So once you submit something to us, you're not getting it back. So hopefully you saved it, or you could just redo it. So be mindful of that. Save your coding challenges for that part of the application. And keep in mind, quarter byte's never been wrong. And a newbie to programming is probably not going to catch a flaw in that website. It's my guess. So keep that in mind. And then the last thing that I tell a lot of students when I teach foundations of programming or pretty much any intro class is most of the people that come to Code Platoon come from non-technical backgrounds. So don't be intimidated by the fact that you come from a non-technical background. You're going to do great if you just put in the work. The people that show up and put in the work always do well. The people that kind of show up and don't put in that much effort are not as successful. So I'm sure it's something everyone here already knows, but I just wanted to reiterate that. CS degrees, all that stuff is all wonderful, but you don't need it to be successful in this field, which is one of the reasons why I love software engineering so much. And that's all I have. Question.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick, Guillermo, because I know you've explained it to the other classes, but there is something like within CoderByte where like it warns you of plagiarism and copying and pasting code in. But if you're saving your own code and you need to paste it in at a later time, you're okay with that, or that's how we save the code?
So great question. I wouldn't paste anything into CoderByte because it would flag it, and I see it. My response to that is don't paste anything. Type it out again, because in my experience, people that are new to programming, you really need that muscle memory. You need practice with all the syntax that coding involves. So I would just type it again, and if you already know it, then type it faster. Because typing speed, I think, is probably one of the underrated qualities of a good software engineer. The faster you can type, the faster you can have a solution for someone. I just got a couple questions from Eric here in the chat, so I'll go ahead and answer them in order. Are the quarterback challenges timed? No, they are not. Are we allowed to use Google? Is it strictly syntax? You are allowed to use any resource that you have available, but be mindful that you don't use ChatGPT or Google as a crutch. And I had a meeting with Nick, our program coordinator, recently, and I will tell you right now a trend that we have been seeing in our applications. When you submit an application to us, we grade you in terms of completeness and points, but also in terms of code quality. And what I've noticed in the last like 3 or 4 months, the code quality of our students has gone up. So the application code quality has gone up, but our student skills have stayed the same. What that tells me is everyone's using ChatGPT to get through the application, right? And then there's this disparity where I look, because when you take the technical assessment with me, I do 2 things. I reread your application because I read so many of them. Everyone's story starts to blur together. So I read your application, and then I look at my notes of your coding, of your application, right? And sometimes I can kind of tell that they use Google way too much, because I'll give you a code quality score, it's out of 10. Let's say I give you like an 8.5. And then when you code, you're like a 4, right? That's too big of a gap. Nerves don't account for such a discrepancy in the code quality. So that tells me that you use Google and ChatGPT as a crutch, which isn't good ultimately. So be very mindful of what you research. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it's something we're tracking very closely. What is the overall pass rate of the Coderbright assessment? Like 50 or 60%, I think, get it on the first try. But then the other half, I have to go back and redo some challenges, which is totally fine. A lot of people have to redo them, and that's fine. Does Coderbright assess brevity? The shorter code solution, the better? Not necessarily. The shorter solution is not always necessarily the most optimal. I'll give you a perfect example. Recursion typically is always the shortest solution, and it's 99% of the time not the most optimal.
Eric, that one hurts. We've already talked about that.
Great questions, guys. Any other questions?
So another one in the chat. What's one thing you've noticed that is common with people that are successful in this program? Grinding.
Yeah. So 3 things. The first one, obviously, what Charles says, you just grind, come on, dude. That's the only way to get better. People that put in the time and really want it, they do well. Second thing that I think is a little underrated, and I said this in an interview once with ExxonMobil, actually. The belief that you can do something is really, really powerful. It'll carry you. And as a kid, we always tell kids to believe in themselves. But you know what I've run into, and what this job has taught me as a grown adult, is that adults stop believing in themselves, which is strange to me, because I've become a better student as I've gotten older. But I guess that's not the norm. Believe in yourself that you can do it. All right, so grind, believe that you can do it. That's like the meta game here. Believe that you can do it, right? And number 3 is, I don't know, and Charles has more experience than I do, so maybe he can chime in on this. I don't know if this is specific to tech, because I've only been in tech for like 18 months, but especially newbies, I think people overestimate their ability. Like, I don't understand that, because I was a history teacher, so there's just no, in my mind, I can't process underestimating something I've never done. And it's so far from the experience that I have, but I've noticed it a lot. People overestimate their ability without having any technical experience, which is strange to me. Charles, is that like a tech phenomenon, or?
No, I mean, humans never fail to keep you entertained in that realm. I feel as a someone in their 40s at this point. Like I've been around the block a couple of times in different industries, but no, it's the big thing is like imposter syndrome is real, right? And so it is very hard to believe in yourself in this industry. Like there is a constant nagging, like imposter syndrome. But the former director of education, John, who was my lead instructor when I went through Code Platoon, gave a really good analogy. And basically the way he said it is like, some of it, like you're going to go to Code Platoon and you're going to have gone through this class and you're going to have read Free Code Camp, and you're going to look at yourself at the end of Code Platoon and you're going to be like a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. And there's going to be someone that is in Code Platoon that already has like a couple of CS classes, or maybe they have like their associate's degree. And like you're like, wow, that person's like a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. I'm never going to compete against that person. But the day that you graduate out of Code Platoon, the scale goes from 0 to 100. And so now that superstar in your Code Platoon class is a 10 out of 100, and you're a 5 or 6 out of 100. And so it doesn't really matter, right? And so what most people are looking for when you come out of a coding camp is one, that you're curious, that you're excited about writing code, that like you're excited about learning, like that you can get amped up when you start talking about it, and that you want to continue to learn. And like the biggest, most important thing that I stress to every last single person that I run across is to be a nice person, because no one wants to work with a jerk, right? And so if you've got that 10 out of 10 coming out of Code Platoon, that's an absolute raging jerk, and maybe you're a 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, but the person in the interview goes like, you know what, that person like is a nice person. I know that if I introduce this person to like a group setting, they're not going to destroy the entire team the first day. Like you've got the job. And so like positive mental attitude and being a nice person and getting pumped up about learning to write code, and that you're excited to go into a new career, like those are the keys to success in this, beyond like grinding and getting these and like getting the concepts. So because I am a hiring manager, and I hire for senior and principal level, so people like with 5 to 20 years experience. And I had an applicant one time laugh in my face when I asked them to do something, and they said they would never do that in real life. And they then said, well, did I just bomb the interview? And I said no, because like you can't, like, and who knows what the rest of the interview is. But that one interaction where I asked for something that was very reasonable and that we ask of all applicants, the person basically derided the ask and laughed at my face to me. And like, yes, basically at that point, like zero chance of getting the job. Like that is not someone that I would want to hire and then have come on my team and that I would have to work with on a daily basis. And as a hiring manager, even if I know that that person isn't coming directly to my team, I don't necessarily want to blow up someone else's team either. So like, I mean, being a happy person and being excited to be there and being someone that's reasonable and wants to learn, like though that will get you so far down the road towards getting your first job out of a boot camp. So let's see here. We've got another question. Also, are you able to work on the side as a developer or run your own company, etc., while working at AWS? If not, is this normal when working at a company? I'll jump on this one real quick too, and I'll let Guillermo say his piece. But I think it speaks directly to Guillermo's last point of like people overestimating where they're at when they're a starting coder. Like you will find out, like if you go to a like Code Platoon, you will have your final individual project, and then you will have your final group project, and you will have these big dreams about what your final project is going to do and how it changes the world. And 7 or 8 days later, when you're done going through the gauntlet of your final project, you're never going to want to see it again. And you will then go into your group project and you will take all of the hard won lessons from your final project and you will finish a project in a group, and you will see how much better in orders of magnitude it is than what you did on your first go around with this. That like you'll be like, wow, this is amazing. And then you can take those skills and bring it back and polish up your individual project. But like trying to like you most companies aren't, unless you're working at some place that's very proprietary, isn't going to have too strict of a policy about you doing work on the side, right? And maybe that's doing a website or some front end coding or some back end coding, but to run your own application from back to front, where you're basically managing security, like a continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline, all the DevOps infrastructure, the back end, the database, the front end, and all of that stuff. Like most people are not capable of doing that coming out of any coding camp on the face of the planet. Like 2 years in, 3 years in, you're probably okay putting like a production level app out and maintaining it yourself on the side.
Yeah, everything Charles said, the only thing that I would add is just the last part that Charles said. It's going to take you a couple of years, I think, to get your feet underneath you. At the very least, that first year when you get to a new job, and that's if you don't change jobs, right? Because you're walking into something that you have like production level code and production level meetings and challenges are really tough. And the boot camp is intensive. Finding a job, I think, is like the hardest thing. But that first year out of the boot camp, yeah, that's hard because everything is so new and you're just getting punched in the face every day with a new challenge. And it's hard to kind of keep your head above water. So yeah, you probably can, because I do code Platoon and I do some other stuff outside, but you need to, one, really, really want it, and two, probably after maybe a couple years, maybe even more than 5 of working as a dev, where you feel like, hey, I don't want to say you're coasting, but like not every day is really tough, then maybe you can think about starting your own company. I definitely wouldn't recommend it within the first couple of years, though.
And Guillermo, I see a question in there. If you could kind of talk a little about what the pre-work cycle is like.
Yeah, the pre-work is literally just a Google Doc, and it goes. The first week is the free code camp, JavaScript, data structures, and algorithms course, the entire thing. If you haven't looked at that, I think it's one of the probably the best free course on the internet right now. I'm a big fan of free code camp. That's kind of how I got my start. So always repping that dude. I forget Quincy, I think, is the founder of it. I love that guy. Follow him on Twitter. So that's the first week, and then everything else is just a series of coding challenges and a lot of other like techy things they need to learn, like Git and GitHub and Linux commands and stuff like that. But I will give you a roadmap, because I know when you look on the internet, you look at YouTube, it's like every YouTuber has a slightly different way of learning the program. I will give you the definitive list of how I actually personally approached it this way, just like dumb luck. But this is what I always tell newbies. First, get really good, like as good as you can at one language. That's it. Don't build projects in that. Get really good at these coding challenges, one of them. Because the sad truth is that if you can't get past the technical screen, you're never going to get to a hiring manager of a tech job. So the actual person that gives you a job, if you can't get past the tech screen, you'll never get. So get really good at one language in this order. Get really good at one programming language, then learn Linux commands, then learn Git, then learn GitHub in that order. Those 4 steps. If you can get as close to a pro of those 4 things before coming to the immersive, you're going to be in good shape.
And I usually talk about Free Code Camp at some point during this as like one of the resources, because I'm the exact same way. When I went to Code Platoon all the way back in 2019, there was no intro to coding, like recorded or live or anything like that. You basically just got an email saying like, hey, great, you've been accepted to Code Platoon. We suggest that you go to freecodecamp.org to learn JavaScript before your first day. And so I will go into Free Code Camp and what that looks like. And it is an outstanding resource. It's probably one of the best ways to learn JavaScript. And even if you're taking this class, to reinforce what you learned here, because they break all of the concepts down that we fly through kind of over like 9 evenings. And they break it into smaller individual sections that are a deeper dive with text that you can read on your own time, and then examples, and then they ask you to demonstrate a specific example, and they build on each other. And one thing I also talked about with the class was that, I mean, we use Replit and probably around like night 8 or 9. So like the last 2 nights, like at some point I'll switch over to VS Code so they can see what VS Code looks like. And I may have been wrong, but the pre-work is all done on VS Code at that point, isn't it? Or are you still using Replit?
What was the last part of that question, Charles?
For pre-work, are they allowed to use Replit, or do you do it all in VS Code?
Oh, no, everything pretty much on Replit until after the technical, then I tell people to switch to VS Code. But if you understand how to use VS Code right off the bat, then you save yourself a step.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of Replit too, so I always like hype it up.
it was throwing a fit last week for me. So yeah, so okay, you get a little bit of a reprieve. I exaggerated. You don't have to do all of the pre-work in VS Code, but as Guillermo said, like the sooner you can switch over to it, you're doing yourself a favor, because you're not going to use Replit at a job unless you work at Replit, I imagine. So
that would be pimp though.
But he also touched on GitHub and Git. And so I will, and I mean, Git is its own language. You use it in the command line, and it's like in Replit, you're not really needing to use any Git because it's all encapsulated. We're only using one file at a time. But I will share some Git resources. Like there's some Git tutorials out there and everything. But if you haven't set up a GitHub account yet, if you're going through the point where you're filling out the application to get into Code Platoon, you should have a GitHub account at that point.
So I always say learn GitHub, but if you learn GitHub, all the other ones are a flavor of it, right? If you do Bitbucket or you do GitLab or Azure or Code Commit for AWS, like all of them, if you learn GitHub, you can learn all the other ones. The idea is literally the same. The GUI is a little different, but the ideas are all the same.
Yeah. And so we've got another question from Justin. It says, going back to resources we were able to use, I know you said don't just copy and paste code. Are there any other programs or anything else that we should avoid, like VS Code? Well, you don't want to avoid VS Code. So you want to use VS Code or anything, or just make sure it's not copy and paste, and that's it. So yeah, go for that one, Guillermo. And I've got thoughts on it too.
Don't use any of the AI plugins like Copilot or anything when you're coding. People use that as a crutch, and I've seen it more lately. People have it, but they won't even know how to do a for loop by themselves. So stay away from the AI plugins and a lot of the really fancy autocompletes for right now. You'll use them later on the job, but right now it's almost too early to use that.
Yeah, and I kind of touched on this, is a lot of places that I mean, pretty much everywhere you work, unless you go to some place that's an open source company, your code's going to be proprietary. And all of these AI plugins that you're feeding your code through, like they're ending up on the AI company's servers for them to be like analyzed. So sure, all of your code's safe, just like your social security number and bank account information safe at your bank until someone hacks your bank. And then all of your code can be like, especially like Chat GPT, OpenAI, like that's the big one right now. Like the code that you drop in it for an example today is someone else's example tomorrow. And if it's proprietary code, like it's not a good look for your company. And I'll show you what Chat GPT looks like, probably like night 8 or 9. And you want to avoid it as much as possible. If you do use it, I think there's an appropriate way to use it where you're helping basically you're helping it debug code that you've already written, and maybe you're not finding out why your code's not writing. but you can ask all of the challenges on the application, all of the challenges here, pretty much any challenge at any Leak Code Hacker Rank, anything like that. You could ask ChatGPT, like copy and paste the ask and the challenge, and it will spit out an answer in a couple of seconds. But that does not help you learn what's going on with it.
So there's this question. Oh, go ahead, Trent.
Well, I was just going to read the question. Is the application process for the full stack and DevOps program the same? Also, what is the difference in the curriculum for the program?
So the application is exactly the same. The only difference is the technical assessment and the coding challenges for the DevOps is in Python only. You can't take any JavaScript simply because Python is big in like DevOps scripting. As far as the curriculum is concerned, Charles, do you want to give just like a 1 or 2 sentence synopsis of the major differences here? We get this one a lot.
Yeah, and so and again, there's some rebranding and rethinking about what the DevOps curriculum is going to look like at Code Platoon. They just went through the initial class, and there's nothing stopping you from going like straight into DevOps from intro to coding and no experience. But I think the tack that they're starting to take with it is that they're looking at this being for someone that's already been in the industry for a little bit, and they're looking to get additional skills. That being said, we need DevOps engineers like it's nobody's business. So like it's a super in-demand field right now. Some of the concepts might be a little bit harder without like a rudimentary, like even 3-6 months, a year's worth of coding under your belt, but that doesn't mean that it's insurmountable. But it is also a specialty. Right. So like you can go in and learn DevOps and still not understand how to write like standard object oriented programming. And so like you do end up then taking a more narrow career field where like it's probably easier for an experienced developer to get a foot in at DevOps than it is an experienced DevOps person if they wanted to switch into like general software development. But either way, they're both in high demand. And the DevOps stuff, and like, are you considered basically in a DevOps role right now or no, Guillermo?
I am not, but in the project, they're so fluid. I am not technically in a DevOps role, but on the project that I am on, I am a DevOps engineer. I'm doing a bunch of CI/CD stuff, so it's fluid.
Yeah, and if you get hired somewhere and you've got a few months of experience and you let it slip that you're interested in DevOps, like they're going to come introduce you to the DevOps team. Like they need DevOps engineers everywhere. I mean, Guillermo works at AWS. He's the reason why we need DevOps engineers everywhere. But it is like it's a very specific language that follows very different conventions than like what you're learning right now in introduction to coding, and also very different than anything you would even walk away from with like the software development part of Code Platoon. So it is a specialized field at this point.
All right, guys, I actually have to get going because I'm late for a technical. But if you have any questions, I'll track the intro to coding channel and I'll go ahead and answer it to the best of my ability. Is that okay, Charles?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for your time again.
Thank you so much, guys. Go get them, guys.
All right, cool. So any other questions that I can answer about some of the stuff that we were just wrapping up with? Yeah, so Guillermo's great. He's high energy. I mean, like he works full time at AWS and then spends quite a bit of time between the pre-work cycles and grading applications. So and he will also be someone that responds to you like all hours of the day if you send him a message. We've got his contact information on the screen. So it's just Guillermo at codeplatoon.org, or he's just like me. He prefers Slack when possible. So just the at Guillermo Aguilar. All right. So it is 6:43. we'll get into session 4 here and talk about some of the stuff that we've got going on, and then we'll take a break here. Let's see here. So it was the last of the 4 main things tested on the live assessment, knowing how to access key value pairs. It is. So I believe he said loops, arrays, objects, and I can't remember the 4th thing that he said, but I can ask him, or if someone's got the full list, they can throw it in the chat for everyone. But yeah, I know for sure it was loops. Okay, variable assignment, reassignment, string manipulation. So now we're up to 5 things, but string manipulation isn't too terrible. And well, none of it's terrible, but loops, arrays, and key value pairs. And you will get lots of practice with that, with the intro to coding. And also, let's real quick here before I get into the slides for the night, let's talk about freecodecamp.org here real quick. All right, so freecodecamp.org is exactly what it says it is. It is completely free. It keeps growing. There's lots of tutorials in here. Oh, I already have an account. Let's see here. All right, so there's lots of different, basically like organized courses that you can get here. So responsive web design. The one that they're talking about that's a mandatory part of pre-work, and honestly, you will have a much easier time of completing the application if you do this before you even apply. Is the JavaScript algorithms and data structures certification. I don't have all my boxes checked anymore, but I mean, I've done this thing from front to back. And I mean, it starts off and like, there's a lot of sections to it, right? So there's 113 sections, 29 sections, 33 sections, 12, 20, 16, 26, 24, 21, right? And then like their final things. And so with that, there's nothing like some of these, like even though there seems like there's so many sections, like some of these you're gonna fly through, right? Like all you have to do for this is write a line in their replit and make it a comment. So try creating each one of the comments. So if I run a test right now, it'll tell me that I'm failing. Well, I can say comment 1, comment 2, run it. Okay, both I passed, submit and go to the next challenge. So like that's all there was for it. But notice over here, they have a more detailed description about each of the topics, kind of an example, and then they ask you to recreate it, right? And with that, like the stuff in the beginning is all pretty basic stuff, right? Like, I mean, assigning variables, so on and so forth. But like, if you're struggling with how to like access index values in an array, right? Like we can do a search here for array, right? So like nest one array within another, access array data with indices, modify array data with indexes, access multi-dimensional arrays within, manipulate arrays with the push method, the pop method, the shift method, the unshift method. So all stuff that we did last week, but here's another chance at doing it again and getting that important repetition. And we'll continue to dive in and start to layer on itself and build on the subjects in here. And it's the same thing. Like, I mean, we can see like comparison with the inequality operator, right? We know that's like the bang equals, the strict inequality. So the bang equals, right? So a lot of these concepts we've talked about, but you can get another second look at it, get some more repetition, and also have like a full description in writing, right? And then basically like an example that you can solve. You hit the button and it'll test it against the test, and it'll tell you what tests you're passing, what tests you're failing, and you can continue to modify the code until you pass all of them. This is a really great learning tool. And again, the stuff at the top is the basic stuff. ES6 is kind of like what we talked about with like the fat arrow function, and using some of the like more modern syntax, like the const and the let versus using the var. And there'll also be some things in here that you won't necessarily need to get into code platoon, but like going through them will help, like destructuring and what that is. And I'm not even gonna go into it right now, but like how to import to other files, to link files up to each other. Regular expressions are the devil. Going through, so regular expressions, or what most people call regex, is pattern matching with data, and it can get really complicated really quick. There won't be anything you need to get out of intro to coding. There probably isn't anything with regex in the pre-work either, and they'll cover that inside code platoon, but like there's a whole section to familiarize debugging basic data structures, right? So more examples in here, but then you get into actual algorithm scripting, right? So here's 16 more examples, like starting off fairly basic, convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, right? And so we do the math for that. I've already done this one, right? So create a complex multi-dimensional arrays, iterate through all an array's items using for loops, right? So as a challenge specifically asking you to use a for loop, like it is going to, the only way it'll pass is if it finds the word for in your code and identifies a for loop. But then like, here's all of the tests that you're going to need to write the code to make this pass. And like, these are just the basic data structures. So like, these are more towards like the first and second night, but they'll get a little bit more complicated. And then let's see, they've got some object-oriented programming, which you'll again cover in code platoon. But then like you get into the intermediate algorithm scripting. So like finding the difference of two arrays, you're writing an algorithm that converts words into Pig Latin, which is where you, on certain words, you take the first letter and add it to the end of the word and add an AY to the end of it. And so like they're going to start to get more complicated. And then towards the end here, like they've got some fairly complicated algorithms that you need to solve. That would be like, you'd want to be able to knock these out before you can take a shot at the application. Like these are all going to be kind of around the difficulty of just at the first question on the application. So if you're making it through these, you're looking good for the application. And then the other thing that is a huge bonus of free code camp is that, one, if you dig in to one of these, they have this get help button in here. So like you can ask for a hint, right? And like there's so many people have like gone through this program that, I mean, like most of these are going to have hundreds of comments, right? Like here's some hints on what to do, and if you're still not getting it right, like you can see a couple of different styles of solutions. They're going to link back to the documents. And the other thing you can do is, so we can say like YouTube diff of two arrays, free code camp, right? Free code camp diff of two arrays, right? Diff of two arrays, internet algorithm scripting. This one's from 2022, 4 minutes, right? Like this is going to
So
give
today
you
I'm doing the
some
if
individual guidance on how to make it through this challenge, or a walkthrough. Some people read by or learn by reading. Some people have it better when it's explained through audio and video. But using Free Code Camp, it is so well documented and extended just past the basic course. Like there is a way out there to basically help everyone that's interested in learning JavaScript. All right. And then you do have past this, I mean, there's more things in here, and you can do any of these whenever you like to, but like down here, like coding interview prep, right? So like here are even more algorithms. like questions that you may get asked about different data classes. And this is all basically things that you can work on to help you get ready for technical interviews. I don't think you need to dive into any of this before you make it through Code Platoon. But if you're an overachiever, you're more than welcome to. But just for right here, like here's 10 more algorithms that can that you can practice that will help you get better at tackling the application. So as far as books, if that's the way you like to learn, I am a big fan of the Head First series for people that are new to coding. And also they're usually pretty easy to get your hands on. Right. Let's see here. So Head First, JavaScript, right? Like I would not pay Amazon whatever $50 or $10 for a copy of this. Your public library, and if you're in a small town, probably has one copy of this book. This is an extremely popular series. And like I live in Chicago, the Chicago Public Library probably has 15, 20 copies of this book in its float. And so the biggest thing is, and what I tell everyone, especially while you're still learning and you're getting your start, is expend all of your free resources before you start paying for anything. Right. And the other thing, like kind of like the next thing up would be like Udemy, right? And never pay full price for anything on Udemy. Like these prices are ridiculous. And at least 2 or 3 times a month, they're running a trial where all classes start at $9.99 or $10.99 or $12.99. But like you will have, if you like the class format a little bit more, like there'll be lots of stuff out here, right? Like this is $189 right now. And if you check back next week when everything's on sale, it'll be like 12 or 13 bucks for the course. I mean, 70 hours, 320 lectures. The only thing I tell you or tell people with Udemy, like, I mean, these are all highly rated like courses, is make sure you listen to the free thing. Cause like Maximilian Schwarzmuller is very smart, but Maximilian Schwarzmuller has an extremely heavy German accent, and he can be difficult to listen to for extended periods of time. So every class will have a preview.
Welcome to the complete JavaScript course.
Right.
You're
so
all in.
Not terrible, but like some of these courses, even if they're like highly rated, the audio can be a little tough. Yeah, if anyone's got any like free resources or anything like that, feel free to throw it out there. But yeah, like Udemy, again, never pay full price for anything on there. Books, if you find a book that you're interested in, like O'Reilly is kind of like the whale in the ecosphere here. See if you can get it free from your library first before you pay, especially if your library is part of the Libby network, which is the like the ebooks and everything like that. Right. So like I know Chicago Public Library does Libby. So like you can, so let's see, Head First, JavaScript. Right. So first edition is a little bit older. There's the second edition that we were looking at. Right. So I mean, there's ways to get it. Like I can get an ebook, I can get it in paperback. You can get it for free. I don't know if they say how many copies they have, but yeah, like they're use, it's like they've only got one copy available now. So use all of your free resources before you spend any of your money on anything to learn how to code. Yep. Yeah. So, and that would be for your first book, like anything in the Head First series. And also, if you're someone who likes to buy books or like digital books or something like that, if you've never heard of Humble Bundle before, Highly recommend it for books. I mean, you can get games, other stuff on here as well, but they almost always have some type of programming bundle up here. Right, so Manning is another big publisher. Any of the grokking books are really good. So grokking the algorithm is a very famous introductory book on algorithm solving, and this is definitely a good one to read. This one is, I can't remember what language is in there, or if it's either written in pseudocode. But this starts covering a lot of the individual deep dives into algorithms, what makes algorithms tick, what impacts their performance, and then it gets into some famous algorithms and gives you examples of them and helps you rewrite them. But again, I don't think this is specifically in JavaScript. I could be wrong if it says in there or not. But again, this is another good book to read while you're starting out. I believe it's Computer Science 101. This isn't it. This one, Computer Science Distilled. This is another great introductory book. Right, and so this isn't, again, specific to a language, but a walkthrough of computer science concepts you must know. This is kind of like a Cliff Notes version of introductory computer science. So there's not a lot of extra fluff, there's not a lot of extra explanation, but it's quick explanations and examples of core concepts of basic computer science, which if you go to college for computer science, you are going to learn computer science, and you are going to learn the history of computer science, and you are going to learn a lot of the academic side of computer science. Going through a coding camp, they aren't necessarily, you are going to learn computer science, but only as a side effect of learning computer programming, right? You're not going to code Platoon to learn computer science. You are going to a boot camp to become a useful junior developer in a very short period of time. So this is even if you read this one after you graduate Code Platoon, this is probably a really strong candidate for a must-read book in your first year of being a developer or trying to learn how to code, because you're going to pick up things in here that you completely blew past in any boot camp that you attend. And it looks like they've got a second one here, and I've never read this one, but I've read both of these two 4 years ago. So I don't remember everything that's in them anymore. All right. So those are some resources. And again, free resources are better than paid resources. And we will talk about Free Code Camp some more before we get out of here. And also, if you run into concepts on Free Code Camp as you work through it, or anything else that you're working through, you're always more than welcome to reach out to me. And I'll do what I can to answer questions on it. So let's see here. So Halsey's asking, do you think it would be worth it to go back to college for a CS degree after settling in at your first job? That really depends what you're looking to get out of your tech career. But it's kind of like a lot of other things out there, right? I don't have a desire, I've got a bachelor's degree in finance. I don't have a desire to go back to school and spend a bunch of money getting my CS degree. Will it help your career trajectory? Possibly. I mean, it just depends on whatever else you've got going on and where you're working. If you like to learn and you want to, then go for it. But if you get your first job and you don't have a computer science degree, to me at that point it kind of becomes optional. The once you've got a couple of few years of experience, no one's going to ask you what your degree is in anymore. Like if you're a productive software developer, it doesn't matter at that point. I don't have any specific opinion on Full Sail Academy. I haven't heard of that one before, but my feedback on any boot camp, and even if you're not sure about Code Platoon, you don't have to take my word for it, is use the coding boot camp rating sites and read student testimonials, right? And not just the ones that get posted on the site's website, because no one's gonna hate a boot camp and then have that boot camp be like, oh man, they said we suck, I can't wait to put that on our front page, right? Like you're never going to see that review. So Operation Code, and again, that is a Slack space. Operation Code is great. There's lots of different things in here. They have a whole thing on coding schools, right, that you can read through, and like there's people in here talking about what their different experiences are. Right, like I mean, like here's someone looks like talking about tuition and scholarships, right? Like here I think you'd probably get some pretty good feedback if you threw out like, hey, what is your opinion on this stuff, right? And like I'm not super active in here. It looks like the last time I looked was 2022, but there are, you'll get some honest feedback in here. And then again, the like right, and so like these ones are the ones that, like I said, you have to be careful about. So like we see some of these sponsored ones, and I have no idea about the MIT one, but like the Northwestern one is ran by a company called Trilogy, right? And so like you get all the advertisements, right? Like so here's coding boot camps according to Career Karma, and different stats. Course report compare the best coding boot camps in 2023, right? Like I mean, there's plenty of different things in here that you can read about. But don't get sucked in by a name, right? Like just because you see MIT X Pro Coding Boot Camp or Northwestern Boot Camp, UT Austin, like maybe some of these are actually ran by the school, but a lot of these are ran by a third-party white labeling company that is developing the curriculum. It has nothing to do with the college or anyone that works at the college, and they're literally just leasing the name to slap on the program for street cred. And there's been lawsuits around some of these, so I would avoid anything like that. But any of the dedicated coding camps, like it's just a lot of it's going to come down to your personal circumstances, when they start, when they stop, like where they're located, things along those lines. Yeah, I have no clue. Well, the Harvard CS 50 is free. I'm guessing that this one is a 32-week professional certificate course, probably isn't free, right? Yeah, so program fee, and it looks like this is a certificate, so probably less instruction, especially at 32 weeks. So, right, executive ed, xpromit.edu. So what is executive ed? Yeah, is collaborating with an online education provider emeritus to offer a portfolio of high impact programs. So odds are MIT has absolutely nothing to do with this program, and it's all through a third party white label. right? And maybe I'm wrong about that, but again, are you contacting someone at MIT about this, or are you contacting someone at emeritus.org? So the biggest thing in here, and maybe this is an absolutely amazing opportunity and program, do your due diligence on whichever one you pick, right? Because with a lot of these, and again, I've got to imagine, like with any choice, is probably the biggest thing that is impacting you is going to be your ability to use some sort of VA benefit, be it GI Bill or vet tech or something along those lines, right? Because let's say that General Assembly, right? Like they're 4.5 out of 5 stars or whatever. And they're just every way, shape, and form a slightly better boot camp than Code Platoon. Let's say they're 4.5 out of 5 across all the different things, and Code Platoon is 4 and 4.25, but General Assembly doesn't take your veterans benefits, and it's going to cost you 18 grand. In Code Platoon, you can go for free or at a greatly reduced rate. At that point, like, how does that weigh on your decisions, right? And so that being said, like, don't pick your 1-star boot camp because it's the cheapest one out there, but there's always going to be and I'm not saying that General Assembly is better than Code Platoon. I don't know where it ranks out in all of these, or where it falls in, or even if it can get ranked in some of these places because it's only for veterans. But like, if you've got VA benefits, pick a place that will take your VA benefits wherever you decide to go. Don't drop 15-20 grand out of pocket for something that you've earned the benefits to get that for free or at a greatly reduced rate. And then Esteban had brought up Harvard CS50. So that is actually a free course at Harvard, or at least it used to be free through edX. And this is like a pre-introductory, so introduction to computer science, right? But like a 50 level course is going to be before a 101, right? But it's free, you can attend it. I think you can get a certificate, or maybe you can attend the course for free and you can pay for the certificate. Don't pay for the certificate unless you want something to pay $50 or $100 for something that says Harvard printed on it, that you'll probably have to print out at home on your own printer anyways. But attending a course like this for free, like it is, right? So 12 weeks, 6 to 18 hours per week, self-paced, free optional upgrades available. So you can probably get like some TA time or a certificate or something like that. That'll cost money. But this would be a great free introductory course to take as well. But again, focused more on the academic side of computer science than necessarily becoming a beginner software developer, right? So this is going to take some deeper concepts and expound on them versus like hitting lots of concepts and showing you how to use them practically day to day. And I'm sure there's probably some other things on edX as well. I haven't explored this stuff too much, but again, the last time I'll say this before we take a break here: free resources, all the free resources are better than all of the paid resources. Any other questions here for me before we take a short break? All right, so let me pause the recording here. All right, everyone, it is 7:19 p.m. Central Time. It is Monday, August 21st. We are in session 4, right? And so we had Guillermo, our guest speaker, for the first part, and we talked about some resources available to help learn coding outside of this program. And now we're going to jump into the slides for the evening, and we're going to cover object literals and some built-in methods on object literals, what we just commonly call objects. Now, we have talked about objects already. We've done some things around it here. Also, and before I get too far ahead of myself, I did go through all of the challenges and update them on Friday evening so that we are like, when you fork a challenge now, you should no longer get hit with like that, oh, we're migrating and it's taking a while. Like, I mean, some of those it took like 2-3 minutes to migrate over. I went through all of them. I may have missed one, but I'm pretty sure I didn't. But when you click on one now, so like if we look at, we'll probably do SpaceX countdown will be a good one, right? And if I fork that and fork it over, right? So now we don't get hit with that, like, oh, we're migrating, all those things. I also went through at the top of all of these and added in our prep block so we don't have to copy and paste that anymore. So that should be a little bit easier, but that I've done, like I said, down the entire list. So hopefully that'll save some time during instruction. All right, back to the slide. Actually, this to all right, so we've got our notes here. And well, I wasn't planning on doing that, but I guess I did. All right, no worries. So a data type that holds a collection of properties where each property is an association between a name, which we call a key, and a value. Right. So the format of an object should be becoming a little bit more familiar at this point, right? We've got key 1, a colon, value 1, and then a comma, and then key 2, value 2, and so on. So we could take an example here, and we've got an object called person. Right, it's going to yell at me over these commas. Let's swap these out real quick. Actually, it yells at me about the quotes. Oops. Oh man, it is Monday. There we go. All right. So remember, if we console.log our person, we get to see the entire object. I don't have anything filled out in it yet, right? So first name is an empty string, last name is an empty string, eye color is an empty string, age is 0. So let's go ahead and do Charles Kubiak, Hazel, and my age is 42. All right, so if I run it again, there are my key value pairs: first name Charles, last name Kubiak, eye color Hazel, age 42. Right, so we've got a string, a string, a string, a number. Right, and we could create a key called instructor that's going to yell at me because I put my comma in. We'll say true. All right, we can say pets, and we could do something like this where we create an array and I could just list the names. So I could say Todd, Mo, Nugget, right? And so we could do that, or we'll start there. So if I run this again, we've got these extra traits, right? We've got true. So again, notice different colors mean different things. Number, Boolean, all my strings are coming through dark orange. The object keys are all coming through as white. And now when I want to access a key, right, or when accessing a, so we'll do key value pair, which I will abbreviate KVP going forward. So if you hear me say KVP or write KVP, we're talking about a key value pair. You can access it through dot notation or box notation. right? Which is either a dot or the box, right? And so if when I run console.log person, I get the whole thing. If I just want to get one thing, like if I just want to see the first name, I can use dot notation, which is dot first name, right? So person dot first name, and I only get Charles. Now that is the same thing as doing person box first name. All right, so if I run these, I should get Charles twice. Now, why I say when you're new and you're first getting used to this, err on the side of using box notation just because it's a little bit easier. There's less gotchas. And some of the gotchas are right now, I have a one word key in here. And behind the scenes, an object in JavaScript is treating this key, even though there's no quotes around it, right? Like this tells us it's a string, but as a key name, with it being one word, it is basically behind the scenes, JavaScript is treating this as a string. All right. And so that's how I'm able to access it both ways. Now, if I do something like this, I will break it. Notice how this changes colors if I run this, right? Like first, and then it's hitting me right here on line 2 saying name unexpected identifier, and it's because it sees this is the key. There's no colon, and then it's saying, what does this do? Like, what are you doing to me? Now, if I want to, I can do something like this, right? So I can say first name, right? And down here, I can say first name, and this will work still. This will no longer work, right? Like I cannot put a space in. Right, see, notice how this turns white again, it's broken, right? So now we're saying missing blank after argument list, right? So it's basically wants this to be a kind of like a method, and it's not, and it's just breaking. This is bad syntax. But if I comment this out, notice how this still works. And so what we're doing is, and so both of these, both dot notation and box notation will access these when we do it like this, but you will not be able to use dot notation to get to a basically a string value with a space in it as a key name, right? Like you default to having to use box notation. So that being said, use which one you're comfortable in. Just know that if you're doing something and it blows up, that should be like the first thing in your head that pops in, like, oh, is there a space in there? Am I doing this the right way? The other thing is, as well, is using camel case and using good variable style and structure for the keys is also important. So you can avoid something like this. And that being said, like a challenge may tell you that you have to have it with like the space in there. They want it to be human readable, but the default would be to do something like this. Like this is how you're normally going to see it. When I pulled up the like the JSON API, right, and we clicked into one of these. Where are they? Right, so like posts, right? So notice how we're not seeing any spaces in here. We're seeing the camel case and user ID. It's all one continuous word, right? And so that is good naming nomenclature there. Yeah, Eric, with that, so technically console is an object and log is a function within the, or it would be a method within the console object, person in the parameter. That is probably correct. Like everything in JavaScript is an object, but we could look at like MDM console, right? And the console, right? So the console object provides access to the browser's debugging console, e.g. the web console in Firefox. The specifics of how it works varies from browser to browser, but there's a de facto set of features that are typically provided, right? And so even within a browser, right? Like we're using it within a replit, we use it within VS Code. But like if I come in here and I inspect the page, right? Like if I come over here, I have a console and things are being logged to my console here. And oops, sorry about that. Right. And so you can write like basically messages to your console within a web page. Because like I said, all of this stuff is going to have JavaScript inside of it. Like anything that's interactive. Right. And so like we can look at the actual like, HTML code and what's going on with it, like the elements. Right. Like I've seen this Grammarly desktop integration. That's probably coming from me. So I have like Grammarly Pro. Right. And so all of these different things in here, like all the, so right, like we're seeing script tags in here. That's telling me that there's going to be JavaScript involved. Hooked.js, .js is a JS file. So these are all these things that we see in, but yes, console is a object. That being said, if that confuses you to what we're talking about within object literals, don't worry about it. You don't have to think of console like an object. Like you don't need to know that to get into Code Platoon or anything. All right, so let's close those down. And so that's where, like I said, I kind of like box notation, even though it's not quite as, make sure I get this back to the right way. Right, like even though it doesn't look quite as clean as like using dot notation, it is a little bit more versatile. Let's see. So if we hop over here and let's take a look. Yep, so you can represent nearly anything with an object. Right, so we've got let organization, key of name, value of Code Platoon, type is nonprofit, topics, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python, cohorts, right? So we could look at the same thing over here. Right, so we could say favorite foods, and we'll say, we'll create an object here and we'll say breakfast. And then we'll say, I think I spelled that right, maybe not. And we can say lunch. Let's say steak, right? We'll say fancy steak. All right. And so within my object of person, right? So if I come back out here, and I'm just going to comment this out real quick, and we'll just take a look at the whole person again. Oops, and what did I blow up? Oh, I did not put a comma here. Right, and so here's my entire object, right? And I know that if I want to see one of the attributes, right, I can say eye color, right? And I get the value. So I give the object the key, it gives me the value. And it's the same thing if I want to look at pets, right? So now it's returning the entire array. So there is a key and the value is in an array, right? And we know that objects have key value pairs, KVPs, and arrays have basically index values. So if I want to pull up Mo, So I'm inside my object. I need the key of pets. I see the value. I want a specific element outside of my array. I need to know the index position. So Mo 0, 1, 2, right? And so now if I do this, right, now I should see Mo printed out, right? And same thing, if I give it a 2, it'll switch over to Nugget, right? And if I give it a 3, it should probably give me an undefined. And it does, because even though there's 1, 2, 3 in here, we count 0, 1, 2. And there is no, like, basically the thing in the 4th index position, which would be 3, would be is not defined yet, right? And same thing if I want to get inside of a nested object, right? So this is an object nested inside of this object. I can do the same thing, right? So I can take a look at favorite foods, right? And I get this entire object. And if I want to then pull out a single value from that next object, I just have to specify the next object down, right? So I could say breakfast, right? And I get the value eggs Benedict. And we could keep going, right? So like I could say, instead of just fancy steak, I could say I like lots of things, right? Like I like fish and chips, right? Fancy steak, burrito, whatever. And so now if I do something like dinner, right, I get an entire array. And let's say that I'd like fish and chips on Fridays, right? So if I want to know what my favorite thing to get for Friday and dinner is fish and chips, and all we're doing is chaining these together, and we're digging down and parsing through our nested data structures, right? Any questions on basically objects and how we can nest data structures, other objects, arrays within other data structures? Right, and I went object, array. I could make each of the elements in my array another array, or I could make the first one an array, I could make the next one an object, so on and so forth. And they said there is no practical limit on how far down we can nest data. Brian, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir. Just if you could explain to me the curly brackets one more time. I see why you have the big curly brackets, but then you put another curly brackets within inside of it. Is that to isolate the next object you had? If I'm saying it right.
Yep. Yes. So curly braces, objects, right? So
Braces, brace. Okay.
yep. So it's curly brackets, I believe. Now you have me questioning the last 5 years of my life, Brian.
Yeah, I always said curly brackets, not braces. I don't know. I guess I go back and forth.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to listen to the recording and see what I've been saying up to this point, because I just blanked out, right? But we get it. So curlies, right? These guys mean right? And so data structures can be nested inside of each other, right? So like a common example that you would see when you start working with JavaScript with the web is an array of objects, right? So let we'll say R of objects equal this, right? So it's an array, and then we'll say object one, and we'll say name. Name Charles, age 42, right? And then we'll say, and we'll just do the exact same thing here, right? So like we would get an array of objects that maybe have like 7 or 8 of the same thing, right? So we say like, I want a query of everyone attending this class that we have on record, right? So we're gonna get like a bunch of different people here. So we're gonna get Eric, and Eric is 30, and we're gonna get Brian, and Brian's 42, and we're gonna get Nika, and Nika's 42, and we're gonna get who else can I call on? We got Roger's 42. We're all 42 in here, right? So, but this is how data gets returned back to us, right? So remember when again, same thing, like if I pull up Amazon.com and I look at it in behind the scenes here, right? Like we get a bunch of other crazy stuff that we see that's happening, but we also get some of our like standard data structures that we see, right? Like looking at this in events, what do we see here? We see a square bracket, or like like the box. Inside it, we see the curly brace, right? So if I open this up, right? And so this is object 0, and then there's a bunch more keys in here. So this is telling me that basically I've got an array of objects, there's one object in it, and then that object has a bunch of key value pairs in it, right? There's 25 key value pairs inside my object, and there's one object inside my array. And same thing up here, we just have an object, and we've got an object with 26 key value pairs in it, or I should say 27, and the keys are numbers, and the pairs are, or the values are all strings representing, it looks like, different domains that Amazon has, right? And so these basic building blocks over here aren't going away. They're just going to get bigger and more complex, and they're going to scale up, and they're going to contain more information. But if you know when you're handling these, right, like you get good at doing an array of objects that's got 2 or 3 things in it, and maybe it's got 1 layer in it, and it's got some info, and you can figure out how to parse it. If I need to start pulling things out of here, it is the exact same thing. I'm just going more layers down, right? But like if I wanted that, I'm just gonna type up here in my search bar, right? Like I can say CS, and then say events, and then say it looks like, I mean, again, I would normally say they're just numbers. I don't know what the little hashes are doing for this. And then I would say hash 10, right? And if I put this into the console while I'm looking at this, I would expect that this would be the return value that I see from cloudfront.net, right? So even though it looks crazy, right, and we're looking at it in a slightly different format because I'm in my Chrome browser dev tools, parsing them and navigating them is the exact same thing that we're doing over here, right? And so we see curly brackets, we know we've got an object, we see the box or the square brackets, we know we've got an array, and if we see parentheses, I think this is parens, we have, and I completely say it, we have a function or method. So that was my fault. All right. So what you're seeing down here is we have an object person, and then we have a key, an object person called favorite foods, and the value to the key favorite foods inside my object person is another object with 3 more keys in it. The keys are breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the values are eggs Benedict, which is a string, tacos, which is a string, and then we have an array of strings, right? So square bracket, we have another array. So doesn't matter how deep I keep going and how complex I make these things, right? I have curly braces, and basically I know that I'm working with an object. I need to give it a key to see a value. get it down into here. I see I've got a square bracket. And I know that I have an array and I need to give it an index position to see whatever the value is at that specific index position, right? And we can keep going, keep making it more complicated, right? Person is an object, favorite foods is the key in it, and then favorite foods in itself, the value is an object, and the key that I'm looking at is dinner. And then the index position I'm looking at in the array of choices for that are stored as a value for dinner. I want to see the one in the 0 index position, which is the first thing. And over here, I see fish and chips get printed out.
All right, cool. Thank you. That was very helpful. Just gotta memorize when to use every single parentheses, brackets. Just gotta memorize when to use those. Um, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yep. And like memorization is going to come through repetition, right? So the more you do these, and it's easier for me to rattle it off, right? Like I've been doing this for 5 years now. So I know off the top of my head that I see a box or a square bracket and I'm dealing with an array. I see the curly brace. I know it's an object every time, right? I see parens. I know it's a method or a function in JavaScript, right? So I know I can move quick, so you can always ask me to repeat concepts. Don't worry about that. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. So an object literal keys and values do not have to be just string data types. They can be other types as well. We just discussed that. All right, and then we've got an example, right? So we can interact with objects, so we can access the value using the dot syntax, which I already did, right? So dot name, or we can use the bracket syntax. I call it box. Bracket syntax works fine as well. And so just remember, we've got the quotes around it, like a true string. We put it inside the box, and both of these things do the exact same thing. When I console.log this, I would see code platoon. When I console.log this, I would see code platoon. All right. So when in is used beside an object, it can check for containment against the keys. And let me do this. In, we'll just draw attention to this a little bit better. Right, so when in is used beside an object, it can check for containment within the keys, right? We've got our in right over here. So if name in organization, so we can console.log true, else console.log false. So we can check to see if a key exists. We can also use a built-in method, which is my fault that I did not copy that over. So again, sorry, this is my first time using this deck, but this is actually a has own property. So, and it should be, just look up the syntax so I know that I do it right. Has own property, JavaScript, so object type, so object one. So it look, that should have said has own property. Name. Right, and so that those will both do the same thing. And so we can take a look at that. Let me just make sure I wrote that. Yep, has own property. So let me just comment this out here real quick. And so if I do something like this, and we kind of write this a little bit larger than it needs to be. So I'm gonna do, let's just call it a ternary. So we can say person dot has own property, and we'll say first name, and we can say, let's call it true or false. And then we can wrap the whole thing in a console.log. Just comment this out real quick. Right, true. And if I say, does it have own property name? Right, we get false. And that is the exact same thing as name in organization. Right, so I could probably do something like this in my ternary where I say and notice how in turned a blue. It is a active protected word, like it is going to do something. Right, and so I get true. So these are both doing the exact same thing, right? And I took my big if else statement here and condensed it down into a term. But this, what I wrote over there is doing the exact same thing as this right here in the slide. There are some different things here, like most of these are going to work the same as what we're used to seeing, right? So object of keys returns an array of object keys, object of values, returns an array of object values, and then entries returns an array of key value of the object when iterating through it, right? So I can take something like this, and we could say, let's cut these out here real quick. Right, run this. Person.keys is not a function. Did I type that in wrong? Nope. So let me do this. Is it's probably on object keys person. This is the correct format. Yes, it is. All right. So this is slightly different than the way we're used to typing it in, right? Like if we look back on the notes on Wednesday, everything that we did on an array, like console.log, all of those things are basically like the data structure that we're dealing with, the dot, and then the built-in function that we're using. With object, there are some different, like has own property worked right on the object, but like object.keys is actually a built-in method on the object class, and we give it the object that it's looking for as the parameter, right? So if I say do object.keys, right? So we can see object.keys is a static method, returns an array of given objects, own enumerable string keyed property values. So with it being a static method, we're writing it directly on object, and then we're giving it an object as a param, and it's going to give that back to us. And so an array of strings representing the given object's own enumerable string keyed property keys. And so this is what I talk about when I say that the keys are behind the scenes converted to a string keyed property keys. This is some magic that JavaScript is doing behind the scene that is turning the keys that you give it into a string, even when you're not putting quotes around it like you normally would as a string. But it'll be the same thing for all of these, this format on the object. So keys, we can do values, right? So there's all of our keys, there's all of our values, and then lastly, if we do entries, it should give us all of the keys and values in a nested array. Still spelling this wrong. Still spelling it wrong. How do you spell entries? Sorry, it's been a really long day. And is it even entries? Am I looking at entries and tries? I wasn't even close. All right. Right. And so now down here, notice we've got an array, right? And then inside of our array, we've got our first key value pair as in an array, right? And so if I were to do something like right now, I'm just console.logging it, but if I wanted to get something out of this, right? So I could say, let entries equal object.entries.person. And if I do entries, right, I see the whole thing again. But if I want to see the first thing in here, right, so I can go 0, right? Now I'm looking at the 0 index position. So I've just got that. And if I want the first thing in there, I can do 0, right? And now I'm down to first name. If I change this to 1, right? Like now I would see Charles and so forth. And that's how we basically kind of navigate through our different data structures. Now, that being said, right, while you're new and you're getting used to this, right, like I always start out at the top level, right? Just look at the whole thing. And then if you're looking for eye color, right, like, okay, I want to see the one with eye color in it, and I throw a 3 in here, right? I don't get eye color, I get age. And like, well, I know that's not right. So I can go back out. Let's run it again. Okay, age was after eye color. I went 1 too far. So let's change that 3 to a 2. All right, cool. Now I'm in there, and now I can do 0 or 1 to get to those different properties. But if you just go in here and you put all your numbers in and run it, you don't get the right thing, right? Like you don't see the rest of it. So it makes it harder to navigate. And that's just like a little hint when you're working with these different data structures. Right, but and so on and so forth, right? Because like it's an array and we have nested arrays inside here, but then some of my key value pairs were a key of a string, but the value was an object, right? Or the key was a string and the value was an array. And so this one is an array. And notice how basically we've gone deep enough where it's not even telling me what's in here anymore. It's just abbreviating it to an array. So let's go ahead and look at this. So if I go to my top level array, I'm at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. So if I come in here and I say, show me the 5th index position, right? Now that I've gone down a layer, it's actually exposing the full array and all of its values, right? And so now I don't want to look at the key, I want to look at the value, right? So let's run that. So now I'm in the 2nd index position in my inner array. And now I know I'm looking at an object, right? And so I can say dinner, right? And now I'm down to my final array and I can give it another index position of 1. And I would expect that I would see fancy state, right? And so now I've dug down 1, 2, 3, 4 layers to get to the data that I wanted, right? And we can keep going and keep going and keep going. All right, and then that is it for the slides tonight. Don't worry if that was confusing as heck, right? Like I just covered a fairly complex subject. This is really the most common data structure, or the most common complex data structure that you'll deal with in JavaScript is an object, right? Like there's other more specialized things out there like sets or things along those lines, tuples that you'll work with, but all day long, if you're working in JavaScript, you're going to be working with objects and arrays, and objects are a little bit more confusing than arrays just because they're not quite as linear. Any questions on this stuff? Okay, so it's 8 o'clock. Let's go ahead and take a look at the challenges here. And I think we should be able to do either one or two challenges tonight, depending on how well we do with the first one. And let's see. So we finished up with convert hours and minutes to types. So right triangle isn't a big deal. It's just adding numbers together and doing some math to find the, was it the Pythagorean theorem? Finding a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The SpaceX countdown is a loop, and we haven't really had to work with that yet. So I think this would be a good one to jump in with. Now, what I will say is I'm going to fork this. I'm going to go over the prep with you on this one. And I'm going to give, and we'll break out into groups. I'm going to give everyone till about 8:30 to take a quick break if they need to, and work on the actual challenge. So we're going to fork the replet, and let me do this. That's the challenge in the Slack, or I'm sorry, not in the Slack, in the Zoom chat. We'll fork the replet, and we'll talk about the first part of the prep here. Right, so we've got a write a function that takes an integer as seconds and prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. And once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. Right, so with this, there are a couple of different things here. All right, so that are kind of in the details. And so the first thing is that we're going to get one parameter, which is going to be a number. Right, and our actual return, right, so prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. So basically console.logs how many seconds there are until liftoff, and once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. Right, so our return is going to be string liftoff. Right, and example, you can pull this over. And I'm also going to say within this, there is no such thing as 1 seconds. It's 1 second until liftoff. And we talked about this Thursday last week on some solutions for controlling for plural versus singular. All right, so let me go ahead. I'm just going to grab this whole thing. I will drop it into the chat. And so you can grab that. I'll give everyone a couple of seconds here to copy that, fork the REPL down, and then I'm going to set up groups. It looks like we've got 8, 11, 14 people here. So I'm going to shoot for groups of 3 or 4 tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. All right, everybody, welcome back from the SpaceX Countdown Challenge. So we're going to go ahead and we did the prep work before I sent everyone to the breakout rooms. I think a couple groups got it done, a couple groups got close. So let's go ahead and go over one of the ways that this problem could be tackled. Now, I did hear that one of the teams did a while loop. Let's see here. So let's just make sure we're getting what we expect to see. So if I have countdown 5 and I console.log seconds here, right, and I run this, I should see 5 over here. So that's great. So let's go ahead and we're going to wrap our function call in console.log. And we know that we're getting everything here. So next we know that we need to do a loop. And I would probably, because I know I'm counting a finite number of times, I'd probably use a for loop for this, just because sometimes it's easier to, or it's easy to forget your counter that you're going to use for decrementing or incrementing. Now, a lot of the example loops that I showed, we were doing like I equals 1 or I equals 0. In this case, so we probably want to start with I equals seconds, because that's going to be where our countdown starts. All right, and then we're going to say while I is greater than 0, and we'll start there. And then we'll say I minus minus, right? And so just to get us started off, the next thing I want to do is probably just console.log I here, and let's see what happens when I give it 5. All right, I get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and so there's 0 seconds left. I'm not hitting 0 here, so we could say I is greater than or equal to 0. Right now, I've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Right, so I've solved the iteration here. That's the loop that I know that I'm going to want. If I change the number to 10 here, right, it should go from 10 to 0. And it looks like it does, so we're good there as well. All right, and I know that I need to, once I'm done, return the string liftoff. So after I go through this, I want to go return, and we want to call it lift off with an exclamation point, right? You know, console.log it, notice it, because like we're actually returning it here, right? So we get that lift off. So there's my count now. So the next thing that I would need to do is probably create my string, or in this case, I'm going to do a string literal. So I'm going to grab this, give it, I believe it's $. We're going to wrap the whole thing in backticks, right? And let's go ahead and run it again. All right, so now I'm getting the strings, everything's in white, right? And so we can say there are the number seconds left until liftoff. Run it. So there are 10 seconds left until liftoff. There are 9, so on and so forth, right? And so I know, I believe it was Doug was saying that, okay, we used an if statement and we want to change this into a label, right? So I could do something like this. I could say, we could even make it really small here, right? So we could say something like this, and we could say, we'll just call it let plural equal if I is triple equal to 1, right? And then we could say that's an S, or I'm sorry, that would just be an empty string. And if it is not equal to 1, we would say S. And why is this equal? Sorry, that's not a colon, that should be a question mark. And all my errors go away. And then I'll just throw this label down here and call it plural. Right, there's, and same thing, I didn't really specify that, but there are 1 second left, right? So we could do the same thing here, right, where we could say are or is equal to the same thing, right? And then we could say if it's that, there is 1 second left, or there are seconds left, right? And we could do the same thing right here now. $sign, give it the curly braces and say are or is. Right, so now there are 10 seconds. There is 1 second left until liftoff, and then there are 0 seconds, right? So we're using some if-else statements or some condensed if-else statements, which again we call ternary operators, right? So right, and we're using it to make some decisions in our program. So as we loop through, we're checking each time to see if it's the number, if I is equal to 1 or not. And then if it is equal to 1, we're returning the true case, or we're assigning this value, the true case value here, to these two variables. And if it's not equal to 1, we would go to the other side of the ternary operator on the other side of the colon, and we'd be assigning the false cases to both of these, and they show up in the sentence together. All right. Does this make sense how I solved this? Any questions about anything I did here? All right, and we talked to, and like I could probably do something like this where I get rid of seconds altogether, and I could call this, we'll just call it second label, right? And that's a better name. Second label, and then we could say second verse seconds, right? And a few extra characters, but that's a little bit more readable in what's going on here. And I haven't impacted what my final output is until I have 1 L in it. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Any questions in here? All right, so the next one we're going to take a look at is remove zeros. Right, and so let's go ahead and pull this over. But write a function that returns a number with all the zeros removed from it. All right, so this one is going to be the most complex one we've tackled yet so far. Right, so I'll give some hints on this. All right, so parameters, we're going to get one parameter, which is a number. And we're going to return a number. I am having a rough go of it today. And we'll say C below, and we'll pull these over here. This, this, on these, run this, we get false, so we're good there. All right, and now our pseudocode. So All right, so it is 8:40 at this point. I'm gonna offer the class two options. You can start to poke at this in your groups. You probably won't be able to finish it in the next 15-20 minutes. And then we can come back and go over the solution with each other on Wednesday. Or if you'd like me to, in the next 15-20 minutes, I can definitely walk the class through step by step on the solution for this. Which one would you prefer?
Walking through the steps.
Okay, so I'm getting one of each, so I'm going to default to that you get a chance to try it.
Okay.
So what I would say then is I'm going to put everyone into groups for like the next 15 minutes or so, and you can start to look at it, and then we'll see how everyone feels about this, because you're going to look at it, and then, like I said, this one's got pretty much everything else we've done so far has got 1 or 2 steps in it, and this is going to have 3 or 4 steps that you're going to need some built-ins to convert between different data types and data structures to solve this one. So I'll let you take a look at it, get a feel for it, and we'll come in and we'll talk about it. And then after we do the slides on Wednesday for 5, we'll probably go right back into this one, and I'll give you some more time to work on it, and then we'll go over the solution together. So any other questions from me? And let me do this. So I'm going to drop this into the chat so people can copy and paste it. Well, it's telling me my message is too big. So let's do it in multiple parts here. How about now? It's that. And it's that. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the breakout rooms. So you got to start to look over this and formulate a solution. You can continue to work on this on your own time. If not, I'm going to give everyone some time on Wednesday when we get back to class to take a look at this. I know one of the groups had pretty good progress on it already. You can Slack with your group members if you want to about this, going back and forth. But again, we'll have more time to deal with this on Wednesday, and we'll go over the solution as a group as well. But yeah, so you can see like the challenges are starting to ramp up a little bit here. You're going to need to start taking multiple steps to solve the ones going forward here. It's 8:58 p.m. Central Time, so we basically got about 2 minutes left. Is there any questions that anyone had before I turn the group loose for the evening? Nothing? All right, let me go ahead and turn off the recording.